Okay, picture this. It's Northern California in the late 1960s, and the entire region is about to be gripped by an unprecedented wave of absolute terror. Most serial killers, they operate in the shadows, right? They hide, they cover their tracks, and they pray they're never, ever discovered. But the subject of today's explainer, he was completely different. Actually, he wanted a front row seat to his own infamy. He didn't just want to commit these horrific crimes. He wanted to play this high-stakes, terrifying psychological game with the police, the media, and literally the entire public. And it all crystallized with this incredibly chilling calling card. On August 7th, 1969, a letter arrived at the San Francisco Examiner carrying these exact words. This wasn't just a confession, you guys. It was an introduction. It plunges us straight into the investigation room of one of American history's most infamous open cases. The killer had branded himself, and he was violently demanding the world's attention. Section 1, The Ghost Awakens, a timeline of chaos.
Okay, let's dive into this. To really wrap our heads around the grip this phantom had on the Bay Area, we need to map out the timeline. The first strike happened right before the holidays, December 20th, 1968. A young couple, David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen, were tragically shot dead in their car on a secluded lover's lane on Lake Herman Road in Vallejo, California. A few months later, another couple was attacked. Now, initially, the police were completely baffled. They treated these as isolated, tragic incidents. But skipping ahead to July 1969, the killer actually grew annoyed that he wasn't getting enough of the spotlight. That's when the letters arrived, escalating to a brazen murder in Presidio Heights in October 1969 and continuing all the way until his final officially confirmed letter in January 1974.
Section 2, Letters, Ciphers, and Taunts, the killer's game. Let's move on and see how this builds into an entirely different kind of threat. Because the Zodiac wasn't just a murderer, he was a full-blown psychological terrorist. On July 31st, 1969, identical letters arrived at 3 major Bay Area newspapers. The writer took credit for the recent shootings, but he included this terrifying ultimatum. He demanded they print his encrypted 408-character ciphers on their front pages, or he would go out and kill again. And these letters were signed with a very specific cryptic symbol. It was a cross inside a circle, unmistakably resembling a sniper's crosshairs. This was his personal brand, literally a logo for his reign of terror. And he actually took this branding off the page and into the real world. During a horrifying broad daylight attack on a couple at Lake Berryessa, he wore a black executioner-style hood with this exact crosshair symbol stitched right over the chest. Absolutely terrifying. Obviously, the public and the police were frantically racing to decipher his messages. But get this. Ultimately, it wasn't a supercomputer or some top-secret government agency that cracked that first 408-character cipher. It was literally just a local schoolteacher and his wife. And the translation was deeply, deeply disturbing. It began, "I like killing people because it is so much fun." This was the unhinged mind of the man they were hunting. But while that first cipher was solved relatively quickly, others absolutely were not. 50. That is the number of years that another one of his codes, the infamous Z340 cipher, stumped the brightest minds in the entire world. The FBI, the CIA, the military's top cryptographers, none of them could break it. It wasn't until December 2020 that a really dedicated team of amateur codebreakers finally unraveled the mystery. And when they did finally crack it, 50 years later, it revealed exactly the same taunting arrogance. The decoded Z340 message opened with, "I hope you are having lots of fun in trying to catch me." It just proves how he viewed this entire agonizing investigation. To the police, to the terrified public, this was a living nightmare. But to him, it was just a twisted game. Section 3. The Tragic Dispatch Error. A ghost slips away. Now, we really have to slow down the pace here because we are arriving at what is arguably the most frustrating and devastating moment in this entire explainer. On October 11th, 1969, the killer broke his usual pattern. He stopped targeting couples in secluded areas, and instead he murdered a lone taxi driver named Paul Stein right in Presidio Heights. This time, he wasn't hiding in the shadows. 3 kids looking out a nearby window actually witnessed the killer in the act of wiping down Paul Stein's cab to remove his fingerprints. They immediately called the police. This was it. The authorities finally had an active crime scene, a perimeter, and eyewitnesses. From the detailed descriptions those kids provided, the police compiled a definitive composite sketch. That sketch became the literal face of a ghost, plastered on wanted posters everywhere. But
How on earth did he escape that night?
So the crucial point is the tragic, frankly catastrophic dispatch error that occurred in those critical minutes. Responding officers were mistakenly told over the radio to look for a black suspect, but in reality, the eyewitnesses had clearly described a white male. Because of this massive miscommunication, 2 officers rushing to the scene actually passed a white man matching the killer's exact description just blocks away. But since they were looking for a black suspect, they let him walk right by them. He just disappeared right into the foggy San Francisco night. Having so narrowly escaped capture, the killer completely capitalized on his blind luck to terrorize the entire city with increasingly unhinged demands. I mean, to prove he was the one who killed Paul Stein, he actually mailed a piece of the victim's blood-stained shirt to the San Francisco Chronicle. He then sent letters threatening to blow up a school bus full of children. He even bizarrely demanded that the citizens of San Francisco start wearing Zodiac buttons around town. He was absolutely reveling in the panic. Section 4. Profiling the prime suspect, Arthur Lee Allen. With the entire city on edge, police interrogation rooms were constantly packed. Over the decades, investigators looked at dozens and dozens of potential suspects, desperately trying to find the man behind that composite sketch. But one name stands out above all the rest in the history of this investigation: Arthur Lee Allen. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the stark contrast between the eerie coincidences surrounding Allen and the hard, cold science. On the circumstantial side, Allen was a convicted child molester, and incredibly, he owned a watch brand named Zodiac. And get this, it was a watch that featured the exact same crosshair logo the killer used. The circumstantial case felt incredibly strong. But look at the forensic reality. Allen's fingerprints didn't match the cab, his handwriting didn't match the letters, and, definitively, DNA testing conducted in the early 2000s completely cleared him. The prime suspect was a ghost. Section 5. An enduring American mystery: the silence. Then, almost as suddenly as the nightmare began, things changed. By the late 1970s, the letters simply stopped. The Zodiac went completely silent. No more ciphers, no more bloody shirts, no more taunting letters in the mail. He left behind a trail of cold blood, uncrackable codes, and a police force that would remain obsessed for generations. But the psychological warfare still continued. There's a massive discrepancy between reality and myth here. Investigators have only ever officially confirmed 5 murders and 2 survivors attributed to the Zodiac. Yet, the killer constantly inflated his own myth. He claimed a staggering 37 victims. In fact, in his final confirmed letter, sent on January 29, 1974, often called the Exorcist letter because he actually took the time to praise the horror movie, he concluded with this self-proclaimed mocking scorecard: Zodiac 37, SFPD 0. It was his final insult, just a permanent sneer directed at the investigators who had tried so desperately to stop him. Which leaves us with the ultimate, haunting question to wrap up our explainer. Who was the ghost of San Francisco? To this day, the case remains officially open. Despite the cracked ciphers, the eyewitness accounts, and modern DNA testing, the true identity of the Zodiac Killer remains buried somewhere in the archives of American history. It's just a chilling reminder that sometimes the monster in the dark simply walks away into the fog. So what do you think happened to him?